Set your burdens down. Set your burdens down. Set your...
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is our, I don't know what number this is, maybe third or fourth Wednesday night, Faith and Values in the Public Square. It's an honor to have Senator Bill Frist with us tonight. Vince Gill was going to come and sing a couple songs, and Vince Gill is sick. He's been in Las Vegas playing with the Eagles, and he called me, and he didn't sound very good. So he sends his love, but we'll have him back another time. But
aren't you going to sing?
No, we want to keep people in the sanctuary, in the chapel tonight. So I'm going to introduce Bill in just a second, but I want to show you a video as a way of introducing Senator Frist.
From the beginning, he dreamed of flying.
My brother in college had started to fly. I was about 8 years old. He said, let's go flying. And when we landed, I said to myself then, 8 years of age, someday I too am going to learn to fly. I've always used aviation as almost like the surgical knife that I use, being a heart and lung transplant surgeon. It has been an enabler for me to do things that I simply could not ever have done.
Dr. Frist uses business aviation to fly the globe, offering health, hope, and healing. Hurricane Katrina.
2 days after the hurricane came through, I loaded up medical supplies and was in my Conquest 1. Again, no commercial flights going in. No corporate flights were going in at the time. But at a special request, I said, I'm going to bring a team in. And we went in, and everybody remembers the images.
In Africa.
The Caravan, it was the workhorse that I used on over 15 medical mission trips to Africa that allowed me to enter into war zones, to enter into areas where there's civil war, to enter into areas that there were absolutely no roads, and be able to do what my hands allowed me to do, and that is to deliver health care. It could not have been done without aviation. It could not have been done. But to build into this whole concept of what I now called as using medicine, using health as a currency for peace.
In southern Sudan.
500 miles west of the Nile River, 1,000 miles south of Khartoum, to areas that were ravaged with misery and suffering. And all of a sudden, because there was this helping hand through healthcare enabled by aviation, made possible by aviation, all of a sudden, fighting would stop. I saw it happen in Louis, Sudan, where 2 million people had died, where 5 million people had been displaced from their homes, where fighting was rampant. By applying this helping hand of healing, by giving hope, all of a sudden, civil war quieted down.
In Bangladesh.
The problem is you can't get the supplies to them. You can't get it. It's cheap, it's inexpensive. The American taxpayer is willing to help out, but the problem is you can't get there. Every year, 30% is underwater. All of a sudden, we can fly in and we can deliver these very inexpensive supplies. The distribution is made possible. And there are wonderful groups like World Medical Mission, like Samaritan's Purse, like Save the Children that I've worked with in Bangladesh.
In Haiti.
Hundreds of thousands of people died. Buildings, poorly constructed buildings, just crushed people because of the earthquake. Through the generosity of corporate America, where there was a continual stream of airplanes going in because all commercial flights had stopped, I hitched a ride. And with that, took a surgical team in with me, a medical team with me. And within 6 hours of being on the ground, we not only delivered our supplies, but went in and developed a hospital there. And the field of transplantation, heart transplantation, would not have been possible, could not have developed. And the reason is you had 4 hours to take a heart out in Toronto, Canada, bring it back here to Vanderbilt and implant that heart. It could not have been done without the freedom to schedule business aviation, you realize we're all part of this big fabric together. We're all part of this garment of destiny together. And it's this oneness of healing, this oneness of hope, this oneness of mankind that is made possible by business aviation, a great enabler for me. Kind of like that surgical knife, which I can take with me. It is a commitment to the values that were put before me and that I did seize and I did grab. And I hope that those values center around making other people's lives a little bit better, and not just in North America, but indeed around the world.
Congratulations, Senator and Dr. Frist, on winning the 2011 NBA.
So I thought that was a fascinating video that would just show a lot of the things that that Senator Frist has done over the years.
Where did you find that?
The internet is where I found that.
I've not seen that in 20 years. 20 years.
I think they did a pretty good job.
Pretty good. So you didn't find it, somebody else.
No, I found it. I sent it to the guys back there. Really quick, introductions can take a long time with this man tonight, but Bill Frist is a native of Nashville. He went to Princeton University for undergrad. He attended medical school at Harvard, trained at Mass General, did a residency fellowship at Stanford, and then he came back to Nashville to start, and he founded the Heart and Lung Transplant Center at Vanderbilt, and did that for a number of years. He ran for the United States Senate in 1994, won that race, became a senator in 1995 during the Clinton administration. He served in the Senate from 1995 until 2007, and from 2003 until 2007, he was Senate Majority Leader. Since getting out of the Senate, he has stayed very busy, and we're going to talk about that tonight. But again, would you join me in welcoming Senator Bill Frist back to Woodmont? Thank you for being here. You've been a great friend and a great Nashvilleian. You make all of us proud. You've done so many things. I want to ask you about your time in the Senate. What did you enjoy most about serving in the U.S. Senate?
Thank all of you for not walking out once you heard that Vince Gill wasn't going to be here. Clay mentioned it right outside. I said, tell him he's going to be here after we don't. But no, thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be with you tonight, and it's always hard, this sort of thing where you're kind of talking and being interviewed, and the reason that it's probably okay, even though a lot of it's like that kind of stuff where it's about me, is that hopefully at the end of 45 minutes or so, it'll provoke or inspire you in some way, and some of the optimism that I have, in spite of where we are today, is stimulated in some way. So the first question is what?
What did you enjoy the most about being a United States Senator?
Nothing. No, I'm just kidding. It's fun because that film showed Dad. I don't think it showed Mother there, but I do remember it was right at the height of a new procedure here, not just here, but around the country, because nobody had ever done lung transplants before or heart-lung transplants. Few people had done hearts, but never been done in Tennessee and the like. And so right at the height of all of that, I remember coming back and said, well, it's working. We've done the heart transplants. We've done the heart-lung transplants. We've done hundreds of them here at Vanderbilt. And it basically said that there is one area that you don't know, Mother and Dad. I don't know. Nobody in my family had ever done political stuff really at all. Dad was probably more Republican. Mom was more of a Democrat, but out of deference to Dad, she kept it quiet except when he wasn't around. So jumped into that whole field and had a great 12 years. As most of you know, I said I was going to say serve 12 years and then come back home, and that's exactly what we did. That's unusual. But I knew I didn't want to be a politician for my whole life coming in. The good thing for me, in retrospect, but I did envision it, was it is a noble profession. And I say that it's not my profession. that it's a noble career, public service. It is different in that doing a heart transplant or being a physician, and it doesn't have to be that. Those are kind of glamorous, heart transplants kind of glamorous now, but anything else is centered on doing things one-on-one, and there's nothing more gratifying than to be able to take a heart out and put a heart in and give somebody life. But at scale, if you're in public service, you can do things you just can't do otherwise. And then why the United States Senate is because you're involved in the globe. You can do foreign relations. You can affect millions of people. So the best thing for me was to be able to do exactly what Dad did and Mother did, serving the community in a humble way, but do it at scale, where it had the opportunity of taking what people want broadly, principles, values, and help shaping it based on your own experiences at a scale that can affect a community, a state, a country, or then as majority leader, the globe. And so that's sort of the plus part of it.
So when you became majority leader in 2003, what changed and what was the hardest part about that job?
Yeah, first of all, it's pretty neat because in America, the fact that somebody who didn't vote while I was doing heart surgery during my training, I didn't even vote because I was operating 16 hours a day. And so to take somebody like that with no political experience and you stick them into this competitive group of 100, about half of this room, I don't know how many people are actually here, and putting the only physician in the Senate since 1928, nobody had been there, a doctor, and every 60 of the 100 people were lawyers. And then starting there, and that's not a problem for those of you who are lawyers, but for those of you not, it's a problem. And then working through to majority leader, not because I was a politician. One of them would represent 30 million people, another 5 million people, another 8 million, 2 million, and 6 million. These are competitive people. And so why would they take somebody out of Nashville who's not a politician, they know is not going to be around for a long time, and put them into majority leader? And there are all sorts of reasons, but I think it was they trusted me like a patient trusts me to take its heart out and put it in. It really comes down to that. And there, I had no idea because I didn't go there to be majority leader. I went there to serve for 12 years of public service. I wasn't in the military. I hadn't served the public broadly. I had through medicine. And so I didn't really know. But if you just look at those years as a majority leader, going to scale, the one-on-one taking care of patients, probably the biggest scourge in the last 100 years in this country in terms of killing people around the world was this cagey little virus, HIV/AIDS. When I went there, in 1980, nobody didn't exist in the United States. When I was a resident, we had 5 cases in 1981. And then it moved to killed 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 every year, 1 million every year, to killing 3 million every year when I went to the Senate. There's no cure for it today, but there was no treatment for it back then. And because of the American people, the American taxpayer, President Bush, who'd never been to Africa, had been one time, but never really been to Africa, but he listened, we were able to pass legislation that ultimately impacted 25 million people who would have died but who lived, but because of American taxpayer leadership, bipartisan bill that we passed, 25 million people are alive who otherwise would have died. So all of a sudden, scale, medicine, health, you see how that sort of thing can fit together in terms of policy. And it's not me, but being majority leader, the only physician in the Senate, somebody who had done what, nobody saw that video. That video is nobody's ever seen really, except another couple hundred people 20 years ago because I got an aviation award because I fly, or used to fly. And, but it does kind of all fit together. You go for health, hope, and healing, kind of like that video said, and then all of a sudden it happens.
So tell us a little bit more about your conversation with President Bush when you were getting him to get behind PEPFAR and that particular legislation that saved so many lives.
Yeah,
what was
so
that
it's
like?
called PEPFAR, the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR. And it is probably the biggest legacy of the presidency those years that President Bush was there. And in terms of a public health standpoint, probably the biggest in the last 100 years coming in overall of a legacy of a government. But it's interesting, at the time, it's kind of just accepted. At the time, it was a tribal, stigmatized sort of virus. We didn't know it was a virus initially, but we figured that out in the 1980s. But we'd done some things in this country, but around the world where 3 million people were dying, we'd done zero. And I worked with President Clinton, and he talked about it, but he had other issues that he was having to deal with that had, you know, there was genocide going on in Rwanda, things like that. So he never really had the time to focus on it. Then Bush came in, you know, this sort of right, conservative, center-right. Most conservatives at the time, like Jesse Helms, said it's an evil virus. It's a virus that is killing selected people because of their behavior. All these things. It seems so strange today. And so it wasn't that popular. It wasn't popular. And so what we did, there were only about 5 of us who behind the scenes put together an announcement for 2003 at the State of the Union message. I was in the middle of Iraq and that, you know, all the very difficult times. And basically the president made a commitment to spend $15 billion, more than any president of any country has ever spent on a single disease in the history of the world. So you had this right-wing president, a Republican majority leader. The Democrats, for the most part, were already on board. You know, they would be willing to do it because it's a lot of money. Democrats like to spend a lot of money, and and for good things. And all of a sudden, we had to get Jesse Helms of the world. And it was done. People would have said it's impossible because he had written an op-ed for the Washington Post and New York Times basically saying that, you know, he would never support any kind of legitimate address of HIV/AIDS. But over a period of time, working with everybody, Democrats, Republicans, Jesse Helms, everybody came to support in a bipartisan way this legislation. So it's a pretty cool story because nobody thought it could be done.
Amazing. A lot has changed in our political culture since you were Senate Majority Leader. There's a lot of anger. The digital age is in full effect. There's clearly a lot of polarization. Populism has been on the rise. What would you say about the current political climate that we're in now and how it is different or maybe not different from when you were a part of the government?
Yeah. The trend, and I'm not telling anybody anything today, it is gone downhill, but not irreversibly so. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But it's gone downhill in the sense that words that you would never use 15, 20 years ago, but now the word I would use is tribalism. We are in a tribal political world of bipolar in the sense you got the extremes there with nobody in the middle itself. And the tribalism is really understandable. So it's not like government is bad or political parties are bad. And when I say understandable, because you've got several things. You've got social media that didn't really exist 20 years ago when I was there. And the social media through algorithms, and we all know it, but basically each of us are fed every day the news that is most like where we may have started, but also it has algorithms that push you to an extreme today. The media that you're exposed to, that your children and grandchildren are exposed to today is tailored, not by you, but to be very narrow and in these tribal worlds itself. From a physiologic and a neurologic standpoint, that repetitive channeling of singular type of news here or here leads to no understanding or no empathy or no listening to the other side. It's programmed that way. And what that does neurologically, it hooks your brain up differently. Literally, you can see it. You can see it through PET scans and CAT scans. The nerves grow differently such that you become more and more isolated. So that's probably number one. Number two, gerrymandering. You hear about it at the state level. That applies to Congress. And from 2010, 2020, there's been a gerrymandering where districts are either red or they're blue, and you have these crazy little districts done. And so that explains some of the congressional part. But the real impact it has, and sort of the third thing is that you have a whole system that I think we saw in Nashville, actually. I know we saw a few weeks ago, probably only 15% of you voted. You look around this room, and that's like the first 3 rows over here, 4 rows. In Nashville, Tennessee, only about 14% of people voted in the primaries. And that means in a gerrymandered world, if only 14%, who's going to show up to vote? It's going to be the very red or the very blue, and in Tennessee, obviously it's going to be mainly the very red. The most of you, your views are not going to be reflected, only the few people over here and the few people over here, if only 14% of people vote. Now, if we had 100% of vote, obviously the person elected would actually come back. But that means that 14% of people already in a gerrymandered or either extremely red district are determining the outcome of the general election. So 14% of the people are determining who is actually in Washington, D.C. Today. Structurally, that kind of thing can be fixed. You can fix it by just voting, starting to vote, and that's a good message that we can all spread coming up. So the list goes on, but this tribalism is really understandable where we are today, and things can be done to reverse that. We can talk about that later.
Do you think people that consider themselves moderates from either party, that there will come a day in the future when that voice can be heard more? Because it certainly feels like there's a lot of people that would say, I'm a moderate Republican, I'm a moderate Democrat, but I'm not sure my voice matters. And yet that's where a lot of people fall, like you just said.
Well, structurally, what can happen is you can just vote. You can vote. And if you don't vote, no, it's going to stay tribal and all. So, but that's fixable. It means that, I don't know if you want to do it from the pulpit, but it means you got to encourage people to vote. Say, don't vote coming in. Secondly, from a democracy standpoint, and democracy is not the problem with it, it's this tribalism that's occurred within. Things like our elections today and the partisanship that is out there today, when you have these sort of things, you can do other types of structural things in the way we elect around election integrity. But things like rank order voting is not something I necessarily want to propose, but just as one of the things that you can do out there. Instead of just having these 2 extremes, anybody can vote for anybody, or you could do it by party, or you could do it in certain elections and rank 1, 2, 3, 4. And if 4 doesn't get in there, all the 4s, their ranking gets up and just sort of redistributed. And then number 3 and 4, all of those get redistributed. So at the end of it, the person who is elected actually is the person who most represents, on average, the people here. Again, I'm not proposing that necessarily, but there are ways that can make things more democratic than the way we have come through a 2-party system today. Still have 2 parties as well. So there are ways to fix things.
So we're 1 month away from this 2024 presidential election. What do you see as being the top issues that voters care about this year, based on your observation?
Yeah, well, we know what the issues are. They are not health care. Health care is on down. They're not the environment, things that we know are fundamentally very important. But the issues like immigration, which is going to be right up there. The whole issue surrounding reproductive rights is going to be up there. It's going to have a huge impact. Education, healthcare will not, environment will not. But those will be the driving issues among the people who are going to be out voting.
So, Senator Frist, you've done a lot since leaving the Senate in 2003. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your top priorities have been? Many of us are familiar with them. Many of us have helped you work on them, but what are the things that have most motivated you and inspired you since you've been back in Nashville, a citizen again? What have been your top issues?
Yeah, so I did, and Nashville's home. I've never left here, all of you know. My boyhood home over on Bowling Avenue was sold after 70 years of us living in it. Killed me, but time to kind of keep moving on. So obviously Nashville is home, all of you know that. I grew up here, then spent 20 years doing the medical, straight service, working hard, trained around the country, but did most of my work here at Vanderbilt, which, by the way, is the largest heart transplant program in the world today. not because of me. I like throwing it out there because it suggests it was because of me. I did the first 10 years. It's really the last 20 years that it's taken off coming in. And then so 20 years there, 12 years in public service, and really the last 17 years have built healthcare companies, typically among disproportionately impacted people, vulnerable populations. We'll come back to that. So as soon as I left, after seeing HIV, global, foreign relations, traveling around the world, doing the medical thing, I asked myself, what is the single most important thing that one can do in a community outside of government, outside of the operating room itself? So the first thing that I did, I taught for a year, which kind of eases me into it so I could learn how to really teach. I was at Princeton that year. I went back and forth. And then started thinking in education. I wanted something at the statewide level, K through 12, public education, because I felt fundamental to a lot of the tribalism is the fact that we do not do well in K through 12 and career-ready type education in Nashville. We do terribly here in Nashville, terribly. You know, the private schools do pretty well, but that's not where most people go. And we do bad in Nashville. We do badly in Tennessee. We do badly in America compared to other developed countries. OECD, the developed countries of the world, we're probably 40th in terms of K through 12 education, a fourth grader and a fourth grader. The 39 countries, they're smarter, they're better than us. It's hard to even imagine that's the case. That's the United States, and Tennessee's at the bottom of that. We're probably 44th. And Nashville, Middle Tennessee, is probably in the lower 1/3 of all the 95 counties here. So we're really bad. So basically K through 12 education. So that's statewide. At the local level, health and well-being, that's kind of what I've done, both in the policy world and in the medical world. So health and well-being, and these are some downer things, but it's where I gravitate to. Nashville right now, in terms of how long you're going to live, life expectancy, and infant mortality, and obesity, and mental health, all four of those categories, is worse than Austin, Texas. All four. Why are people mentally have more sick days here than in Austin, Texas? Oh, by the way, in all four categories, we're worse. How long you live in infant mortality and obesity, and I could add hypertension, and I could add mental health. Why in all of these five categories are we worse than Charlotte? That's North Carolina, so they probably smoke over there as much and that sort of thing because of their history. Why are we worse than Dallas, Texas? Why are we worse than Fort Worth? Why are there more sick mental health days in all five of those cities? Our sister cities that we're competitive with for bringing people like Oracle here, if they knew that we were worse. And I asked you why we're worse. Anyway, I say all that because we started 8 years ago, Nashville Health, one word locked together, nashvillehealth.org, and we're trying to figure that out so that we can remedy it. That's at the city level. The state level education, globally, I am focused on this is truly global, a thing called the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is the largest conservation group in the world. And I chair that global board. We're in 77 countries. We're in all 50 states. We've saved 500,000 acres here in Tennessee. We look at issues of biodiversity. We look at issues of species and climate change. And why is that important? Because the World Health Organization basically says it is the single greatest health threat to humanity over the next 10 years. That's this whole world of climate change. Climate change, by then you say, well, World Health, we don't care what they think. The National Academy of Medicine, the Institute of Medicine, the most revered, respected group of physicians and healthcare professionals basically say it is the most significant threat to our human health over the next 10 years. And so it's something people aren't aware of. So that's at the global level. Issues, we can come back and talk about firearm safety because that's the biggest issue that I'm focused on now to bring people together because right now it's a public health issue. The single sort of most significant impactful cause of death, more than car accidents, more than congenital heart disease, right now are firearms. It kills more people under the age of 18 than anything else. So it's a public health issue. And we can fix it. We can fix it. We can come back and talk about it. But spending a huge amount of time, and you can see, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about that here shortly. That's on the nonprofit side, and this is what I'm obsessed with: is health, hope, and healing. It's been, the mission work that we've done around the world, the church work, the faith-based work, and it's not. Don't wear it on my sleeve, but it's just the way I grew up with mother and dad. And then on the for-profit, sort of how do I, earn a living? We start healthcare companies. It's pretty cool though there too, because the government can't do it all. The big companies can't do it all. And we know in healthcare, we have the best clinical care in America, in the world, here. Not the heart transplant stuff, it's unbelievable. We can do cancer therapy, it's unbelievable. But we have among the worst outcomes in the world. There are 23 countries where people live longer than we do than in America. There are 32 countries in the world whose infant mortality is lower than the United States of America. We spend more money, we can do more good stuff, but from an equity issue standpoint, our overall outcomes are worse than 30 countries. Why is that? So we built healthcare companies. So we built healthcare companies here out in Nashville in palliative healthcare, end of life, that last year of life. We built a company there. This is the private sector, so I'm a believer in capitalism and pulling things together. And that was about 10 years ago when people were not talking about palliative care, and it became the biggest community-based palliative care in America. We built a company over the last several years called CareBridge that focuses on the frail elderly. And the frail elderly are people who are older but also poorer, and they just fall through the cracks in this country. And so we built a country, and compared to the other 5,000 companies over the last 3 years, the Inc. 5000, it was the fastest growing company last year, called CareBridge. And then another company that we built is on chronic kidney disease. For years and years, the thing to do if you had chronic kidney disease was go on dialysis. But dialysis, and several of you are probably on dialysis, it's tough, and it ties you to a machine. And so we wanted to build a company that would keep people off dialysis and address things by control of hypertension and diet. So work the private sector hard around equity issues, vulnerable populations, disproportionately impacted, addressing quality and addressing cost because it's so expensive, and outcomes and access to vulnerable populations. And in the nonprofit sector, work at the state level and the local level and the global level on issues that all come around health, hope, and healing. And it really started with going on rounds with Dad in his doctor's bag, and I was talking to Dave Malone, Pat Malone a second ago, that were humble people, and going on rounds with them around this city.
You've been very, very busy and continue to stay busy. It's remarkable. Let's talk about gun safety since you brought it up. I've had a chance to work with you since the Covenant tragedy that impacted this community, many people in this room. You started to mention that gun violence has now become the #1 killer of children in Tennessee under the age of 18. Yet issues around gun safety are very polarized. It's viewed by many as a wedge issue. On one end, it's like, do you believe in the Second Amendment or not? Leave it alone. We don't seem to have much of an ability to find nuance, which is really what Safer Tennessee is trying to do, is where are the things that we can agree in hopes to make this better. Why is this issue so charged, and why are we unable to come up with some common sense laws that may not solve everything, but that will help?
It too was not an issue 50 years ago when I was growing up. Even the NRA, which has caused so much of the tribalism around sort of Second Amendment, that if you believe in firearm safety today, it means you're not a believer in gun ownership. And it's fallen into where we started, this tribalism. But it wasn't that way 50 years ago. Firearm safety was something we all believed. The NRA, they were the #1 firearms safety group in America until it fell into this tribalism. And so it's fallen into it. I'm hopeful about it, and I think right now, sort of Safer Tennessee is the single best place that emerged out of a tragedy here in taking a common sense approach that addresses the tribalism of what people still are locked down in. You know, the Second Amendment people who can't see anything else, and then other people who basically, you know, who can't come across the line. So what we need to do is say, how do we solve that? And the best thing you can do is come to the table, to have a civil conversation. Is that possible today? I think right now what we're showing through this is that you can have a civil conversation about it. One way to do it, which I have been the biggest advocate for, and it works, and I've been in Washington, D.C. working with it, Safer Tennessee is sort of talking to our state legislators, is to make it a public health issue, not a Second Amendment issue. Second Amendment's important, and those of us who are gun owners, and I grew up with these same boys that were in the film, you know, hunting as a gun owner and believe strongly in the Second Amendment itself, but there's nothing contradictory about that when you're talking about firearm safety. By making it a public health issue, which you did, and which I did, is it is the #1 killer of kids under the age of 18. So that is a public health issue. So once you define the issue, you go back to the root causes of the issue itself, and then obviously whatever the symptoms are and the root causes are, you want to put common sense issues and values that we can all share. So the sorts of things that we can do, and that Safer Tennessee, it's a nonpartisan group, is doing, and it's tough to sort of stay in the middle, meaning you know, not following these tribalistic sort of isolated, non-conversational groups, but they're doing it really successfully, and I've seen it in action. The sort of issue, say it's a public health issue. Since it's killing kids, why is it killing kids? Well, 50% of all of those deaths are suicide. Now, why are there suicide? We have to come back and look at mental health of kids. What you don't want to do, and they mentioned in the debate last night, what you don't want to do is stigmatize it as a mental health issue and say that's all you need to do, and because it's not. First of all, it stigmatizes mental health. It's not fair to the mental health sort of movement overall. The second thing, there are things you need to do. So if I were you and leaving tonight, I'd say, what can I do? I would support the organizations here locally that focus on the mental health of young people. And there are a couple communities in schools.org is one, STARS is another one, but you can find one that focuses on mental health of young people today. So more than half of these deaths are suicide. The other half are the sorts of things that you know about, the tragic shootings that we've seen recently in the news, and like Covenant, accidental deaths because of firearms are sitting around. So the three things that you can take home to do are safe storage. Right now, if people have guns, and this is all firearm safety, have something, and it could be regulatory, it could be what you could do, it could be trigger locks, it could be making sure guns are in safes, because if somebody on the mental health side says contemplating suicide and there's a gun sitting there, especially if it's loaded, it's just too easy to do. So we need to address this whole bucket of secure storage. A second one is right now background checks. We don't want guns to get in the hands of people who we know have either threatened other people or have a mental illness that might hurt somebody else. Right now, it's background checks, and background checks generally are accepted by the American people, but anywhere between 20 and 30% of all the guns that are sold don't have background checks. So it's a background loophole. So we need to close that loophole because it means there are a lot of guns today that can very easily flow into the hands of people who are going to hurt either themselves or other people. Easy, most people agree with that if you bring them to the table, most people. Even the MAGA, the Trump people themselves, who would fall more into the Second Amendment group, in Tennessee, 70 to 75% of that group, shown through polling data and survey data, will agree with both of those. Republican and Democrat in the middle. And the third are these temporary transfer laws, which is court-ordered, that if somebody said, I'm going to kill my spouse, or I'm going to kill my boyfriend or my girlfriend, and they basically tell people they're going to do it. Right now, there's nothing that you can do. And through the court, there should be these court, with all your rights protected, be able to temporarily take guns away from those people and then work it through our legal system to either return those guns or be able to get the appropriate care for that. So those are three examples that overwhelmingly Tennesseans, red and blue, are in favor of. And then the question is, why, if that's so true, because the general rule of thumb from a legislative standpoint, if you get around 80%, anything can pass. Well, in this case, it can pass, but it's going to take people talking to our legislators themselves, bringing them to the table, having the conversation itself. And then I'm absolutely convinced that we can address things. More guns, and Tennessee is an outlier, so we have to act. We're talking about it's the number one killer of your kids and your grandkids. It's the number one killer, but it's also more guns are stolen out of cars in Tennessee than any other state in America. They're not being stored safely in Tennessee, yet Tennesseans, for the most part, agree that they should, and so we have to communicate through the legislators in a common sense way. So anyway, I don't want to go on, but that's
something I would add
yeah.
about Safer Tennessee, because I've chaired the statewide advisory board that you're on until you're ready to take it back, and you let me know. But so what's a preacher doing, being a part of a coalition that is talking about a controversial issue? And Safer Tennessee is probably the most nonpartisan and I would say bipartisan organization that I've ever been a part of. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, there are gun owners, hunters, and that's what it takes, is for people to come together and say, we agree on this. This is a problem. You can't deny that it's a problem. And yet, one of the uphill battles for organizations like Safer Tennessee is that in Tennessee, there is a supermajority. And so what you can hear is you'll hear a state legislature say, I agree with you. I think that's a good idea. I think that makes sense. But if I bring this up back in my district, I'm out. They'll primary me, and I'm out. How do we continue to, that is one of the greatest challenges for an organization like ours. But there are so many people from multiple parties that all agree on everything you just said. So what does that look like in the future in a state with a supermajority?
I think language is important, and I've seen it through addressing all sorts of issues that get polarized and characterized by language that forces the tribalism and ultimately the voting for the reasons you said back at home. So I would encourage you, and this is, again, where Safer Tennessee is good to help you with that. Instead of calling it gun control, which in everybody's brain triggers to Second Amendment and taking your guns away and you're taking your protection, because guns to many people are protected, or they're in neighborhoods where it's important, and there's reasons for having guns. And instead of calling it gun control, which sets off in the brain these neurological hookups, call it firearm safety, something like that. And it's as simple as that, and all of a sudden it keeps people in the room. It keeps people at the table, whether they're a hardcore Republican or a hardcore Democrat, to get the conversation going. And that's what you have to do with your legislators. And it's not just the legislators, because they, I talked about public service being the great opportunity to serve the public, but for certain people, survival is important, and if you want to stay in office, you are going to listen. So we have to come back to where, and that's why when I got out of the Senate, I came back and helped start SCORE on education, K through 12 education, because we do need to educate the American people in terms of being better citizens, whether it's civic education or participating in voting, having a responsibility to be there. So I think we do need to come back and educate broadly as much as we can people in districts. In Safer Tennessee, spent, I think, all day yesterday in Chattanooga. So it's not just a Nashville movement. It's in all 95 counties coming coming across doing that.
Well, Erin Rogas, who has been one of your policy people for a long time, she's here tonight. Where's Erin? Probably in the back.
There she is. Round of applause.
There she
Erin
is.
Rogas.
Yeah, she's done a lot of great work. And there's many people here tonight that really care deeply about this issue. And look, for many people across the country, including Nashville, Tennessee, Covenant School, Woodmont Christian Church, this really hit home 18 months ago. We lost a beautiful little girl in this church, and the pastor of Covenant lost his daughter. And so I don't see as many examples in our society of a nonpartisan / bipartisan effort like Safer Tennessee. I think we need to have more of them. And anyway, I'm really, for the people that are working on that and that care about that, you need to feel heartened, because the things that are being proposed could help, will help. And then the question comes back to, you mentioned mental health among our children and adolescents. What else can be done in that realm?
Yeah, they hold that question because it's really important. On the Safer Tennessee, so people will know, they've been at it really since the Covenant shooting, and it is all over the state now. What's pretty cool for me to have seen, because I've spent so many time at a state legislature for 12 years and run the one in Washington of the Senate, is that these volunteers, and now with some lobbying help coming in, it's what they did in past, but also what they stopped in terms of just educating people, doing the storytelling that we're talking about, rationally, quietly advocating, making it a public health issue. There were 10 different bills that were going to expand both the supply of guns and loosen up the sort of restrictions that we know need to be on them in a society that's naturally as violent as ours. And what they were able to do on 10 different bad bills is stop them by education, not like come out and violently stop them. And then there are 4 pieces of legislation that were actually passed that were incremental and small, but these small steps are what cumulatively over time are going to change culture and going to change our attitudes and are going to educate people. And we don't talk a lot about them. I study them. Erin, who does policy, lives by them. And again, there are 5 or 6 Safer Tennessee people in the room, all of whom are committed to these small, celebrating them. That's what I'm kind of doing right now, because that's what changes behavior. It's not these sort of great change it and like a ban. You think a ban on assault weapons would kind of change the world. It's much, much, much bigger, much more complex than that. And the successes that were had. Just one example, the background checks. We know it's important. If you don't do a background check, that anybody who does have a mental illness that is abusive or violent or aggressive to the extent they're going to hurt or kill somebody, if they can walk in and buy a gun today with no background check whatsoever, you know that that's going to cause tragedy of some sort. And so for background checks, one of the problems we had in Tennessee is that the law was on the book. So this is the 80% that would get the background check. We got this loophole there which needs to be closed. But we had hundreds of thousands of backlog because we didn't have enough people doing the background checks. It had not been financed adequately. So what Safer Tennessee has identified that as a problem and then fixed the problem to get the funding so that the background checks that were on the book could actually be done. And that's a huge, but probably none of you in this room were aware of that, but it's the sort of thing that Safer Tennessee can do. And your question on the sort of mental illness, first of all, it's important for you to recognize that in Nashville, Tennessee, we're worse than Charlotte, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, all those cities, that people have more mental illness in the sense of normal people going to work. It's called mental illness days, that our well-being is worse. We got to figure out why. That's not the purpose of tonight, but it's a big thing for me to figure out. So that's the larger macro environment. And it's housing, and it's transportation, and it's equity of way care. It's not doctors. We got the best doctors here in Nashville. We've got good insurance coverage here. It's not the healthcare system, it's health. Healthcare is not health. Healthcare is like 20% of health and well-being, so it falls into this 80% of health and well-being, and mental illness is a big problem of it. In children, what do we do? So I took SCORE. One of the things, I say it's always we, but what we did, we took SCORE, State Collaborative on Reform of Education, which is in all 95 counties. It's now about 14 years old. It's big now. It's in Tennessee. It's yours. It's a nonprofit here. And we partnered for 2 days with Nashville Health in the mental health community to study why. And we have a report. There are action items, 40 action items that we're underway. So we need to study the issue itself of mental health. And then we have to, I think the most immediate thing that all of you could do, and I mentioned a couple, I could list others, but look up STARS tonight, see what they do. Some of you may be active. Look up communities and schools. They're very effective, people like all of you volunteers who are focused on mental health in our schools and mental health of our young people today.
A couple more, and then I do want to open it up for some questions tonight. You had been out of the Senate 7 years when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, also called Obamacare. You were a favorite on the talk shows when all of that was being debated and talked about and hashed out in the Congress. So here we are, 14 years after the Affordable Care Act. There have been efforts to try to repeal it. There have been changes made to it. Where does it stand now, and what other comments do you have about the health care system in the United States?
Yeah, well, Tennessee's got a big problem today in that we were not an expansion state. So right now, the federal government would have supported sort of 94% of the expansion. So the Affordable Care Act had huge problems. It was passed and that was the first mistake. When I was majority leader, we never passed a major socially driven bill without bipartisan support. And as majority leader, I can tell you that I could always get 4 or 5 people from the other party, or if the other party's in control, they can always get 4 or 5, but it's hard to do. But once you do it, everybody's got ownership of the bills themselves. The Affordable Care Act was passed on a party line vote, and therefore when things aren't going well, it's easy for the people who didn't vote for it to say, well, that's their bill, I'm not going to fix it. So it took a long time to fix it. The good things that it's done is that it used to be of the American population before it, 19% had no insurance. No insurance means the hospitals can't stay in business. It means there's cross-subsidy. Your insurance rates have to go way up to pay for the people who show up in the emergency rooms. And today it's down, it was 19%, and today of the American people, it's down to 8%. Huge success. From an access issue, if access is important, and from an equity standpoint, access has got to be important to you. That's the Affordable Care Act. And again, huge problems with it from other access issues and from some quality issues and the affordability of the issues that help certain people but hurt others. Huge problems with it today, so I don't want to oversell it. All that's to say Republicans, nobody's going to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Nobody in their right mind. President Trump is not going to try to appeal or former President Trump is not going to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act if he gets in today, so nobody is today. Tennessee has a particular problem in that right now, and I'm not trying to do a causal effect sort of thing, but I've told you what we're suffering from here in this state in terms of health care. We were not a Medicaid expansion state, and therefore our Medicaid today does not cover people that are up to the poverty level completely. We didn't fill that hole. We're one of, I guess, 7 states who didn't do that. And I think if we'd done that, a lot of these equity issues for vulnerable populations, not for you as much, but for vulnerable populations, which bring our overall standings on how long people live, the quality of life, the productivity, absentee days would be improved if we did expand.
Senator, I've known your family a long time. Your oldest son, Harrison, we met at Princeton years ago. He was an undergrad. I was in seminary. You guys can get that story from him some other time as to how we met. But you are he's here tonight. You are a father. You are a grandfather. I was kind of a 2-part question. What worries you most about the future of our country? And at the same time, what gives you the greatest hope about the future of our country?
Yeah. Everything we talked about is kind of disturbing for the most part. And so let me flip it quickly because the thing that keeps me going nonstop and energized is that I am more optimistic now about the future of America and Nashville and Tennessee than I've ever been in my life right now. The things that we don't talk about, and America's course, you know, it's hard. Right now we're in a huge funk, and this presidential election is not going to pull people out. It's going to probably make things worse. But let's step back just a little bit further and look at several areas. Cancer survivor. There are a huge number of you who have cancer today who 30 years ago, you would not be alive today. Right now, survival for cancer has been improved by 40% in the last 25 years, 40% from all kind of cancers. There are a few cancers, you know, that we hadn't made progress on, but 95% of the cancers right now, survival is unbelievable. And with CRISPR technology and the technology you're reading about with artificial intelligence, it's going to improve. Right now, how long we live today, yes, the last 2 or 3 years, last 4 years, it sort of plateaued out. But in 1800, that was a long time ago, the average person lived to about 25 years of age. And when I was born, the average person lived to about 60 years of age, and now the average person is living to about 80 years of age. And with survival, and it has to do with cleaner water and cleaner air and vaccines in part, but we've made huge progress in terms of cancer survival. Poverty, extreme poverty, where 30 years ago, you had 40% of the world living on less than $1.60 a day. That's extreme poverty. 40% of the world, that's not that long ago. To some of you it is, but 40 years ago isn't that long ago. And that was 40%, and today it's around 6% in terms of extreme poverty. We've just about eliminated extreme poverty. And I'll keep going. I'll give you one more. Of kids, those of you who have kids or grandkids under the age of 5, it was only 30 years ago that we had, well, I'll say it this way, the overall survival for kids under 5 globally, not just in the United States, has been cut by the overall mortality has been cut by 100%. So childhood survival has improved twofold in the last 40 years coming in. So when you look at these really, really, really big trends, America, and to some extent the world is going to be okay. The question, so that's why I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic about artificial intelligence. I'm really, from a scientific world, we have tools today that we didn't have 5 years ago that will continue to make progress in cancer, in transplantation, in Alzheimer's, and dementia in the next 10 years, probably most of it coming in. So I'm really excited about that. The tools that we have today are just incredible coming in. I brought 17 people in artificial intelligence and healthcare to my office yesterday, and I had the national labs. We have the fastest computer in the world over at Oak Ridge Labs. Most people don't know that. The fastest in the world there. I brought in the bioinformatics, biohealth informatics. The largest department in the world is at Vanderbilt. They have twice as many in their department of bioinformatics, which is kind of computers in health, than Stanford, than Harvard, than UCLA. We don't realize the sort of resources that are here. So the biggest concern to me, and I'm always working, my mind for some reason always going 5 years ahead, is what the World Health Organization has recognized. And it's something that's not intuitive. And we saw it with the hurricane 4 days ago. We've seen it in the last month where, not just here in Nashville, but it's been hotter now than it has in the history, a recorded history, than ever. And it is climate change coming in, and it's species loss. The fact in the last 40 years, we've lost half of all the species of birds in the world. Well, you can say it doesn't matter. Well, the globe has been around for millions and millions and millions and millions of years, and the balance, once we've disturbed it, it's hard to reverse that. So issues around climate change, which have been identified by the smartest people in health and healthcare in the world with the World Health and National Academy of Medicine, is the issue of climate change. And so one of the things that I hope to do is take this tribalistic view of, oh, it doesn't really matter, or it's all just sort of natural or not. We're seeing things that we've never seen that we're going to continue to see, so we have to adapt and we have to mitigate. And I throw that out there because it's something a lot of people are not interested in. But for me, what I'm saying is the most significant problem we have.
So what do you say to people? Because we all have had conversations where they say the earth is so many years old, and why do you think this is happening now? Can be very skeptical of it, and how narcissistic of us to think that we're having an impact. What do you say in those conversations?
That there's always been huge changes and fluctuations and adaptation and elimination of the dinosaurs and all that stuff coming in. So that's no argument. So most of people will say that, and so there's nothing we can do. Well, I'll guarantee you there are things we can do from an equity standpoint where you have a disproportionate impact on poor people on hot days, or on people who are in schools. And you can say, well, you can have more air conditioners. Well, we don't have more air conditioners. And when you're in 110 degrees and you have a child trying to learn, and I just said that the lack of K through 12 education is the challenge that we have coming in. The issue that people can debate, but probably if you take all of the scientists in the world, that only 5%, 6% would argue, is not an apocalyptic view, but the fact the industrialization of the world and the reason we can get in our cars outside and we can live a great life and look good and eat well and all of that is the industrial world that we live in. And it 100% has required historically taking things that never had to be taken out of the ground, and that is the carbon. And that the carbon, when we're expending it for good economic things, and I'm not arguing we ought to slow down economic growth at all, we just have to find alternative sources sometime in the next 20 years, that goes scientifically to CO2, and that stays in the atmosphere and puts a blanket around the earth. I don't know a scientist who would disagree with that. So it is new, therefore it's reversible if we eventually get alternative sources to it. It is a blanket. And that means all of the heat that is normally generated that used to be dissipated stays here. Therefore, the oceans warm, the climate warms, the air takes more moisture in it, and when we have Hurricane Helene, you have Asheville, North Carolina, which is totally unprecedented forever because more water is released. So it's kind of simple stuff coming in.
We could talk all night. There's a lot of things we could talk about. I do want to stop and give those of you who are here tonight a chance to ask questions. So our rule is if you please make it a question, put your hand up, and Luke's going to come around if you have a question for the Senator Frist tonight. Anything you want to add before we open it up?
No, and also I see what time it is, so we won't keep you here long. So let's take questions, but no more than 10 minutes so I can get you home. All right, there you go.
Sounds good.
I want to go back to education for a moment, and if you listen to the television and what even the candidates are saying, and I don't know that that's accurate, but we spend more money per student in this country, yet we're so far below other industrialized countries. What is a common sense solution to that?
Yeah, a great question. The question I think everybody heard, we're spending on a per capita basis more money per student. And so if we spend more money, is that going to have an impact? I think two things. First of all, how we teach and what we teach, and how we support the teachers that are teaching so they can teach more effectively. And there are ways to do that in terms of mentorship, in terms of really professionalizing and supporting teachers in a way of using data so that we can measure where the inequities are, because some people are being taught very well, but the people who are not being taught very well are not learning very well, so we can focus on them, not spend more money on the whole system itself, but focus on that particular population. SCORE, and that's sort of what we do. And we focus on the teachers, we focus on the leadership of the schools themselves, and then we focus on how people are being taught themselves. And SCORE would support charter schools, so it's not just the public school system in a traditional sense. What we have shown that the state took, and started with Bredesen, it's been a bipartisan thing, has taken public education in the state from where we were 49th, and then we came 45th, and then we came 40th, and we've got up to as low as like 32nd, and in certain classes about 25th. So we know that when other states are doing things sort of in a status quo way, that we proactively doing certain things can improve from 49th to halfway. Halfway is not good enough. 25th is not good enough. So the encouraging thing is that we've shown in Tennessee in the last 8 years, last 10 years, that we can move the lever itself. And that doesn't mean we don't have more competition and vouchers and competition and that sort of thing as well. But we're going to have to take care of the massive people in public education.
Can you comment? Vouchers have been in the news a lot the last couple of years. I know that's a big question. It would take a lot of time, but how do you respond when people ask you about your thoughts on vouchers?
I think vouchers clearly in the states that have applied it have been effective coming in, clearly. Here, it's been proposed in different ways and it's been narrowed down so much how effective it will be. But we know empowering people to be able to go to schools that are available, that are better schools, and empowering them with the money or a voucher of some sort can make a difference.
Thanks for being here. I've got a moral question. In an election where there are two candidates where you don't really feel comfortable voting for either, is it ever moral to not vote rather than casting your vote for somebody who you think is, you just don't have faith in? Or you just vote for the least clear, least present danger?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Given our political system in the way that we have set it up, which is worked pretty well, for all of these years coming in, and you have two candidates, neither of which you like, or if you just don't like one, but you don't like the other quite as much, do you vote for the one that you don't like, quite as much coming in? I think we just have to decide for ourselves. I think most people, if there's one that you think is a greater threat to our Constitution, to democracy, to the freedoms that we cherish, than the other coming in, so you're not going to vote for them, then the decision is what do you want to do? And if you write in a candidate that you say, okay, that would be good, in your own conscience, depending on who you are, that may be sufficient. Or if you vote for the other person. The problem with voting for the other person, obviously, is that if they end up hurting the country more than you thought, you say, gosh, I should have done the other. So I think it's an individual decision. But I think either is a moral decision coming in. I think the big thing is to vote, is not to not show up at the polls. As I hope I've left with you, probably the biggest part of the tribalism today is the fact that most people are not showing up at the polls.
So you should still show up to vote,
Yeah.
even if it's
Absolutely.
Even if it's really hard.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a moral issue, but I think our responsibility as American citizens who believe in democracy and freedoms and a constitution, that probably the single most important responsibility is to show up at the polls.
Let's do maybe one or two more and we'll close it down. Right here, Martha.
Both parties have said that democracy is at stake in this election. How fragile is our democracy?
I think everybody heard that democracy is at stake, and you have both sides saying, that it's at stake and who is there coming in. I think my optimism says that we're resilient and we're going to be okay. I think probably being more realistic, and if you look at history over time, that every civilization will come for a period of time and then will come down. And I think that gives us the greatest opportunity today by coming back and supporting the basic things we're talking about, is our values and our Constitution and voting and the rights that we're given and protecting them. So I think it's fragile. I think it's a call to action, and I'm optimistic and really believe, not just hoping and not just saying that we can recover from this sort of ebb and flow. We're clearly down right now. And the real historians, people like John Meacham, all say, there have been worse times. And so we don't want to overstate it, but I think it is a call to action to participate and protect our democracy and stand up and express our voice and have these conversations.
But what our founders set up was pretty incredible, and so I assume you believe in the system. You believe in the checks and balances. You believe in all the things that are there that have withstood the test of time.
Yeah, I do, but I think it's going to take activism and action and proaction to protect it now. And it's just, I've spent too much, as you saw, I've spent most of my life in other countries, and in Sudan, where you see where that country is today, and 5 million people displaced and 3 million people killed in a civil war. You see Haiti. 2 nights ago, I was in Washington celebrating the gift of the National Gallery supporting Haitian art. And I've been in Haiti a bunch, and Tracy, my wife, and I were there 4 years ago, and with Brad Paisley and Kim Paisley, and I was there in 2010 multiple times after, terrible earthquake coming in, and that country today is, in chaos today. I will say, it's not me saying it, but I will say in terms of, if you look at China and you look at North Korea and you look at the Middle East, that since World War II, and this includes, I think, the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's never been a more fragile time in terms of international relations today. And now we have this whole nuclear weapon thing is concerning. And
I didn't ask you about that, but that was the news yesterday with Iran attacking Israel. Do you have any thoughts on how that might play out and proceed from here?
I think it's too early. I think it's way too early to be able to take something as isolated as that coming in.
All right, let's do one more, and then we need to stop. I think I see one more in the front, and then we're going to call tonight. Let the senator go home here. Jeff, front row.
Again, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom. We're in church, and this is faith values in the public square, and I'm wondering what you would think of the perspective that we as a church bring our values to impact and hope to change the world for good, and you've emblemate that or symbolize that in your whole life. But what would you say to the idea that maybe churches and religion have been, in their efforts to kind of align themselves with making moral decisions about politics, it's actually been changed more by the politics, and that actually churches have kind of lost their power by becoming too involved in political parties?
Yeah, the church, as you saw from the film, wherever you got that most of the work that I've done globally is centered around faith. And they mentioned Samaritan's Purse, and Cole Barfield, Mary Lee, my sister, and her husband are here, and he's worked with Samaritan's Purse, and Samaritan's Purse, it's international relief. Not all my international relief has been through that. And so my whole life is sort of centered with this sort of faith centricity. There's been more faith in action probably than evangelical type faith coming in. And I think as I look at the question about fragility, that the faith and through church as a part, sort of the correlation and the integration of the two, gives a place where the values can be discussed in a safe place, in a secure place where everything can be talked about. And the centricity of faith obviously takes you to the values very directly. But I think that for the fragility and the salvation of our democracy and escape from this tribalism and solving the health equity problems and vulnerable population, there aren't that many places where you can have these safe conversations built on values. And I think that is the role. I will say that, and it's a longer discussion, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think our academies are really interesting as well, what we have seen in higher education in the protest. And how much should chancellors of universities take positions that can be perceived as political positions? And the reason, and this is different in church because the values, that needs to be a safe place where things are discussed. I think Chancellor Dearmeyer here from Vanderbilt, who's become a real national figure, he very much would argue that the chancellor, the people at the top, should not take strict political positions. They can't personally, because it shuts off anybody who doesn't agree with them in a university setting. So I think we have to be careful in churches as well to, advocate based on values and faith, and depends on what faith it actually is. But I think what you don't want to do is advocate as a leader. I think political leaders are different, but as a leader, if you have the potential of suppressing civil discourse or in some way inhibiting 50% of people who might not agree with you.
That's a great question, and we could ask many more, but one of the things that we've tried to do with this forum, and we've had different speakers and different perspectives, is we do believe here that we should talk about these things. And we have at Woodmont, if you're not a part of Woodmont, we have a big tent. We like that. Too many churches are now sorting themselves out, red, blue. They're taking the focus off Christ, and they're forming congregations around their politics, which is a problem. Here, we call ourselves purple because we don't know what the breakdown is, but we do believe that when we come together, we have speakers, we talk about issues that matter. We do bring our faith and our values to the public square. But if you can't do it in the church, then I've said, I don't know where else you can do it. And so if you can't talk about it in the church, I don't know where else you can talk about it. Let's thank Senator Frist again for being here tonight. I'm going to close with a prayer, and we have one more session. It's going to be next week, and it's going to be a panel of pastors that's going to talk about what it means to be Christian, to act Christian during an election year. So that'll be our last week. You can join us next week. Let's say a prayer, and we'll let you go home. Loving God, thank you for Bill Frist. Thank you for the faith that his parents raised him with, that has inspired him to travel the entire world to help all kinds of people. As a doctor, as a senator, as a public servant, somebody who cares. Hopefully tonight, hearing from him, hearing his intellect, his experiences, it will inspire all of us to continue to ask these questions about how can we help? How can we make a difference? How can we talk about these issues that impact all of us? All of this we lift up in Christ's name. Amen. All right, let's thank Bill Frist one more time. Thanks, everybody.